Hello, and welcome to the Fausty Witchcraft Shop.
Hiya.
Say hello, Chris.
Yo.
Right. So today's topic is Academies of Unseen Arts. So when you say that word that we nicked from Sabrina, that thing, Academies of Unseen Arts, what springs to mind for you?
Baphomet.
Right, okay.
Well, that's where the entrance is. In the main corridor.
Right.
Baphomet.
Okay.
That wasn't what the answer you wanted.
Mystery schools. That's what gets in my mind. I think mystery schools, or I think Hogwarts, you know. But if you want to talk about Baphomet, I think we could talk about that for a show. I mean, we already did a show on her. It. But I mean, if you wanted to do that, sure.
No, I'm good.
No?
It is interesting how they had to pay. Didn't they have to pay a load of money out to the Satanists for using that particular statue?
I don't know whether they won though, because I know the people that did that Chilling Adventures of Sabrina's show. Is it on Netflix or is it on Amazon Prime?
It was on Netflix. It's a Netflix show.
Yeah, they used an actual. I think they used an actual replica of a statue, Baphomet, for the devil.
Yeah,
and they ended up getting sued by the Church of Satan, who didn't really like it. Apparently, they were demonizing the devil, which is quite amusing on a lot of levels, really.
But it's true because obviously they use him as an icon for and an antagonist for.
Whereas the baddie, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So they don't. The Church of Satan don't actually worship him as a actual entity. It's an anarchist thing.
Well, they're all atheists, aren't they?
They're all atheists, so they wouldn't believe in God or the devil. So, which is always fun. Anyway, sorry, I'm already tangenting. What were we supposed to be talking about? Mystery schools.
I thought we were going to talk about mystery schools. So there's some big questions in there that we should probably sink our teeth into. But before we get on to that, obviously we've got a couple of people watching. But if we sum up what mystery schools are now, super simply, and then that way, in another 20 minutes, when other people jump on and they ask what a mystery school is, we can then turn around and say, well, we've already discussed it, watch from the beginning. Does that sound fun?
It does sound fun.
It's a little game we like to play on live feeds.
Yeah, let's do that. That sounds good
Chris,
to me.
What do you consider to be a mystery school? What is a mystery school?
Well, I obviously consider it from a classical context, like I do most things, which is where we're talking about we're talking about mystery cults, in where you would actually have a school that had a particular set of deities that they would work with, and they would teach the metaphysics as well as teaching kind of witchcraft is a bit of a stretch because you wouldn't really call it witchcraft and there was no word for witchcraft then, but kind of deity work and kind of magical practice, I think you can get away with saying. And there they would they would be inducted, initiated into a mystery cult, and they would learn and explore new ways of working with that particular deity, as well as representing parts changes in the year, and the mythological stories were used in order to actually follow their stories. But the mystery school part is an initiate only conversations about magical working. They try and say that we brought some of these back, particularly with Gardner and ilk, and his cronies tried to bring. I think it's still going. You've still got the Church of Isis in Ireland, don't you? And things like that. Oh, have I lost Liam?
I've got the official mystery school. Okay, so this is modern mystery school init.com.
Okay.
I think that's supposed to be stand for international. So Mystery School International, their definition, because they are claiming to be a mystery school, is mystery school is a body of initiates who have dedicated themselves to preserving, protecting, and perpetuating the mystery teachings. So, that's basically what you said. Well done, Chris. You officially know the definition of what mystery school is according to, I believe, are they the ones that say that they're the last mystery school? I think something like that.
Well, possibly. But the idea is, the reason it's called a mystery school is, one, because you don't necessarily, even the people within the group didn't necessarily know who each other were. So, this idea now that secret societies and whatnot, that they know everybody within, there would have been some members, normally the high chosen ones, the kind of high priestesses, plural, not individual, as the Wiccans do it. There would have been a group of priestesses that would have been the inner sanctum, and that they may not have always declared who they were. You'd have probably got an idea, because you'd have got pretty intimate with these people. A lot of these were fertility cults, therefore there was lots of sex magic. But, you might not have known who the actual, you might have known who was in the group, but not actually known their individual roles, because most of their actual individual roles were often done in garb, masked, etc. So therefore you wouldn't necessarily, because it was all about embodiment, which is not something we do much of nowadays, or at least that's not in my practice.
It's exactly like Breaking Bad, Chris, because they all know of Heisenberg, but they don't know that he's a high school chemistry teacher. They don't know who he is. They just know of the legend that it's a Heisenberg, Everyone knows, but they don't know who he is, making his blue meth.
So with the mystery schools,
it's all about essentially preserving knowledge, yeah? So it's all about the knowledge in the form of mysteries.
Yeah.
So we got our first question from Alex.
Ooh.
Are you referring to the Eleusinian mystery cults, Chris?
Not specifically, but that's a good example of them.
This format that nowadays we kind of refer to as mystery schools as one of those things that crops up a lot throughout history, where you've got some kind of secret society, and it's normally seen by the local community, I would say, as either a school, but a closed private school, or is seen as a priest or priestesshood. So you've kind of got the ideas from outside of the doors of the mystery school, the everyday plebs and the like. You will think of, well, it's like the private school in that, well, rich people, you might not send, if you're a pharaoh or a king or what have you, you might not send your firstborn, but if you go knock out a couple of more kids, you might send some of those other kids there, because of course they're kind of getting in the nitty gritty of learning mysteries, and these societies and mystery schools generally are pretty powerful from a political perspective as well. Just look at Egypt for that. But essentially it's all about the mysteries and exploring knowledge.
At the end of the day, you need to have enough disposable income that you could send any of your children anywhere, let alone, if you'd go and you got an income from a farm or whatever, then obviously, you were going to have to either buy slaves or, have enough children to work the fields and man all the jobs that you needed doing. So the only people that could really have enough leisure time to do anything like governance. And the thing was, this is the bit that's kind of mimicked in what happens with the Catholic Church, but is that kind of part of, they were two equal parts of the city. They were on the same level. god, government. They were the same, or should I say gods, plural. So they were a big part of everybody's life. So being chosen to go into one of these mystery schools, or paying your way in, was the other way in, like any good private school. There is that kind of arrangement. But yeah, what's the mysteries obviously refer to the stories that are told in order to tell it. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. But the what's different depending on, which is where it steps away from what Alex is talking about with the Eleusinian mysteries, that's a specific kind of set of Greek stories that are going on, and some of those go back before the Greeks, but the Greek ones are the ones you best know. So, like he was saying, Dionysus is the big one. Well, actually, I don't think he did actually say that, but I read it as if that's what he'd said. Whereas obviously you had other mystery schools in all sorts of ancient traditions. The only thing I don't know is if they existed in the South Americans, but I was never there, so I don't know.
Well, if memory serves me, you've got the idea of the kind of chieftain, tribal elders, people in your group, your pack, your tribe, essentially, that are quite knowledgeable, the elders, and then obviously religion starts to creep in with that point. But when you've got larger population, you've got people that are able to just dedicate themselves to that work. So then you've got just the people that look for the omens and the, advise the king or the queen or whatever it is. And then it's that point where things get interesting, because it's that point when you've got a priest/priestesshood whose purpose it is to kind of understand, really, because that's where it comes from. It comes from survivalism, is understanding why is it that earthquake just happened, and what the fuck is an earthquake for a start, those kind of things. But when you've got those people that aren't having to worry so much about supporting themselves and having everyday jobs, those people that are normally quite well trained and intelligent, what then happens when they develop a taste for knowledge and a thirst for it? That's when these mystery schools really, I think, start to come in, because you've got, okay, they do kind of have to fulfill a role, and from the outside they're seen as kind of mysterious people that know the ways of the gods and the like. But then what you talk about when you're talking about actually going into the realms of the mystery school, particularly higher up, it actually becomes more of a quest for knowledge. And certainly, I think in ancient Egypt, you see a lot of these kind of universities / I'd think of them more like mad scientists in laboratories. Yeah. They're coming up with all sorts of crazy ass experiments and the like. They're getting their funding from putting out the odd,
But that's because that's pre-science. So, at that point, their version of science was metaphysics, rather than it being metaphysics being that spare bit that's over there, that the string theorists and whatever deal with. They can't really see it. It's not tangible, but you find ways of proving it with mathematics. But that was their science. The idea of kind of, counting droplets of water and condensation in a little tower was not something they were really doing. They were going to look at the stars and predict it before it happens, rather than actually waiting for it to show signs of. So, the metaphysics was still going on. And when you think we still base our roots of astronomy and mathematics, and a large part of physics to the work that was done then, and we haven't actually really got that much further with some of it. And the more that we kind of rediscover, the more that triggers thoughts and processes. Pretty much anything that's going on in the tech world these days was either pulled from the ancients or sci-fi. Like, are those not the two main sources of inspiration for anything that actually happens these days? But anyway, to kind of answer Alex, because he's kind of tried to answer us. This is what I mean. I understand that's about as much as I know. So I don't know whether or not these priests had mystery schools or not. or if it was a hereditary thing. So with god kings, you would assume that you just went from one god king to the next. And in the priest caste, again, they're hereditary systems normally. So you would have a seer within a bloodline, and then you would just find the next one that was tested to have the gift. Whereas what we're talking about in the West, because that's the experience we both have, is these kind of mini universities, or what becomes universities. These are people, like Liam says, with enough time to explore literature and lyrics, music. It wasn't simply just magic. It was, musical schools and things like that were because all of these were for the gods. So, or pushing a particular type. So, a god school for a mystery school around Apollo would be obsessed with music and prophecy. Whereas, if you were dealing with, Diana and the moon, there'd be about the wild hunt. And it would all be about creating the best weapons and things like that. Whereas we don't have that kind of spirit, leanings now, because universities design the best weapons and militaries. But before then, everything was then consulted to that priesthood. So there was always that balance of, if a military leader was going to go do something, it better be agreed with the gods first. Or if they failed, it was because they didn't. So it's a different notion, but at the same time, it's still what we do now. Our gods are governments, unfortunately, now. Rich families.
The evolution really of the mystery schools, because you really need to treat each true mystery school as an individual, because they are very individualistic, if you want to get anywhere with understanding their mysteries anyway. But generally, as a rule of thumb, if you see kind of commonalities within structures, when you've got the priesthood, priestesshood, whatever it is, religion side of things turning into more of a traditional idea of science, what you then have eventually, of course, is you've got to look at the structure of that. So very often the person in control of the mystery school is not the person who is actually in control of the mystery school. So generally, in modern times, because you can liken a lot of bigger mystery schools to universities nowadays, they have a similar structure. Universities are principals, the people they go out and cut the ribbons when a new building's made. They go out and do all the publicity, and then they attend obviously the big functions and the like, and do the paper pushing and that. Really, what that is the pharaoh or the king. That class of people, they're the ones that go out and appear to run things and show up at the right times and are in title, at least in control. But what you've actually got is who actually runs the university. Well, in universities, of course, you've got the professors, department heads, that kind of thing. But as well as, you've got to remember that the crazy professor that's doing the weirdo experiments that then produces something that can be patented and then bring the university money in, it's a money-making thing. So you need to remember that universities are money-making businesses, essentially. And back then, you need to think, well, what does that mystery school want? What is their goal? Some of them devolved and turned into money-generating things. Others were a little bit more, they went kind of down a slightly different route, which was all about the furtherment and understanding of knowledge and the like. So it was to push themselves further. And they did the other stuff for show, but actually it was a very serious practice of pushing further and further. And it's at that point when we get later on to the standards past the medieval period, when you've got the kind of Abrahamic religions trying to take over the world, where you've got, okay, mystery schools that do exist or don't exist. You can no longer have a marketing department. We can no longer think that we can exist. We cannot show we exist. So in that case, you've got people that really took the format of the understanding of knowledge and the pushing of that. Really, all they require at this point is financing. They just need their basic needs met in order to continue their work. And it is one of those things you don't see mystery schools around nowadays. I mean, I, as a joke, kind of pulled up the Modern Mystery School International. You kind of got the ideas of the Greek mystery schools where you've got the great philosophers and that teaching groups of people. But you don't see the Egyptian cults. The closest thing to that normally that you'd get would be secret societies in modern times. And
but most of that's recreationism, isn't it?
Yeah, they're not really as sophisticated and I think sturdy. I think I want to use the term sturdy as back in the ancient times, because you've got things like the Masons, Freemasons, which is a large structure, but it is a large structure with lots of people in there using that structure for their own advantage. You know, some people want to set up little groups within the Freemasons. Other people are just happy to be Freemasons. You've got the ideas of modern neo-paganism, where you've kind of got people trying to start up cults, which whether it's witchcrafty type cults, so kind of like following on from the ideas of Margaret Murray. And what you really wick is essentially is trying to create a modern mystery tradition. Some would say failing miserably at it, but being persistent and pushing further and further and further. Of course, the big problem is the lack of knowledge, really. So there is no handing on the knowledge necessary. When you are creating a new mystery school or tradition, the founding people of that mystery school and tradition need to kind of forge a system of pushing themselves further and then evolve that system. A lot of the times in the modern perspective, what you generally get is you get people that want to try and copy systems from before, never really experiencing them and knowing nothing about them. That's when you got a lot of the stuff that you get from the Llewellyn Publishing Company and a lot of neo-paganism, rather than focusing on let's create something new because we don't really know a lot about the past. Instead, they throw all of their effort into pretending that they understand the past. And most importantly, what they used to really love doing during the 80s and 90s is let's pretend that this is an ancient thing and that we didn't just invent it a decade ago, you know, and that isn't very good, because at that point, what you tend to get is the muddying of water of, well, here's a mystery. Shit, I don't understand it. So what I better do is tell the neophytes that it is a mystery and they've got to work towards getting to it, because I don't fucking know myself. And you do get that as put in. Back in the day, it was really used as a system of control, you know, like the old Sith from Star Wars, you know. I am your master. If you hope to overthrow me one day, you've got to basically be my bitch until you learn enough to challenge me. Whereas nowadays it can be a little bit more sinister, because a lot of problems that you get within modern mystery traditions is not necessarily just control, because you do get a lot of that with black lodges, definitely. But a lot of the time is making up for or trying to compensate for a lack of mystery. There's a lot of that. I think we've actually got a couple of questions. So would you acquaint ancient mystery schools with brotherhood/sisterhoods of the church, or like the Knights Templar or the Jesuits? Again, you have to think of the mystery school that you're talking about, because they're all quite different. They might share a similar structure.
Yeah, so they're not, because with the brotherhood, sisterhoods of the church and things like that, Knights Templar, what you're talking about is groups and bonded by creed, which is not exactly the same, but yes, you're talking about groups of people that had a shared goal. Shared goal was normally to discover the mysteries of the universe, and that's where the kind of mysteries part is coming from, is this idea of they're wanting to better understand the world and their part in it. The difference in what people get obsessed with, particularly the Wiccans, kind of post Gardner, etc., in these kind of recreationalist mystery cults, is down to the fact that actually they're focusing on the wrong part. The main part wasn't the deity. The deity was their patron, essentially. So then that, you know, that was the agreement. We include you, we get power, additional power to what we already have. Like that's the arrangement. We keep you know, you give us the power that we need, and obviously the power that was coming in was wealth. People, even if you didn't have wealth, would make donations of food or livestock to a temple complex. And that was the lifeblood of keeping these places open. So, you know, it was the case of they weren't just arriving with gold. They also had, you know, some of the Greek cults and some of the Egyptian ones would have had looms in the back where they were making cloth to decorate so that people could buy parts that were used in their home altars, you know. So you've got this sharing of wealth that's coming, and what brings that here is the arrangement with the deity. The deity is, we look after you, and we research all this in your name, and in reciprocal arrangement, we get the gold and whatever is coming in to make the building better, etc., etc. So you've got to think these people were living in this facility, so it was all being paid for by the locals, in the name of the god or goddess whose name was on the door, kind of thing. It was your big corporation before corporations existed. The difference was Nike wasn't just a brand, it was a goddess. So, you know, there is that kind of connection there of, you know, the brand was, you know, Zeus or some, and depending on where you were, obviously, they would have had different specialties. That's why there's like 100 different Athenas all over Greece, because they were kind of sub-brands of particular deities that had a particular specialism. And what you would be getting is that kind of university, the research and development department, the R&D department of the building was doing these sorts of things, developing new ways of practicing, new ways of making, you know, some of these places, particularly when you talk about the Egyptian ones, they were specialists in alchemy, in metallurgy. They were finding new ways to create different kinds of precious metal, or developing new ways of making weapons. Like, these were your kind of R&D departments of the ancient world. Whereas, you know, a prayer at the beginning and the end of a session with a god and goddess is hardly the equivalent to what is an ancient mystery cult, where they were making business deals, they were making all sorts of marriage ensnarements between big families. All this was being arranged in one space, in which case those sorts of things do have connections with what Michelle's talking about, which is, you know, Knights Templar or, you know, the Masons or whatever. There is a kind of little bits of that sticking around. And obviously there is the philanthropy that comes with it. But at the end of the day, they were always pushing something. You know, it was the next level of, if it wasn't magic and witchcraft, because it wouldn't have been all of them, but there was always an aspect of it involved. You know, they might be the ones that developed the latest spear point in this new way of making, you know, iron or bronze, whatever was occurring at that time. Or they might be the ones that are selecting the best artists to make statues and cult icons. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it was all about pushing the boundary. And I think that's the biggest thing that's missing from these modern mystery schools, is that the whole point is to push and develop and move forward. And that's our criticism.
That would be your biggest difference, Michelle. So with what we're talking about, you're really talking about evolution at the core. So you're, as a tradition, mystery school teaching, the next generation should push things further. The organization should become more powerful or more refined or move further in the direction they're trying to move into. When you're equating that to the church or brotherhoods and sisterhoods of the church, then you're talking about, okay, if you've got a monastery and all they do is stay in prayer all the time, they're not pushing or evolving. They're doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, which is a big problem that you see in a lot of modern neo-paganism. They do the same thing over and over and over and over again. There's not really any pushing. Now, what you could think of is you could think, well, if that monastery where they do the 24 hours of prayer every day in shifts, if that is not the mystery school, but there is a mystery school there, maybe the mystery school is somewhere in Rome, and that monastery is a small cog in a bigger machine designed to generate energy and feed it towards the people that are doing the real work in the mystery school. Remember, mystery school equals training. And then obviously, much like science, you're trying to hope that the next generation will push further and further and further. But again, you have to remember all mystery school traditions are different. What they want is different. Their experiences, power, whatever is different. So we can't be too general, but at the core, that's what you're kind of talking about. So what does Alex say? That's why I think it's always best that any scientist, artist, magician, or witch get a day job and start their own business so they never have rely on fickle patrons that may or may not help you depending on what you do for them. So essentially, you're really talking about the structure of how a mystery school tradition continues. So generally speaking, obviously, if it's a mystery school tradition or any magical tradition or secret site or whatever, if it has a power and ability, it's going to be able to use that power and influence and ability to get what it wants. The main purpose is to spend more time doing the work of the mystery school than raising capital for that mystery school. So like any good business person, the main priority is to make sure that you, as the person that owns the business, never has to set foot in that business to do a day's work. That it should be a system that runs itself, that you can utilize for your own advantage. What does Alex say? Alex says, I mean, don't you as a cunning man basically do that, Liam, when you accept clients? They make you a meal and you solve their problems for them. In this life, I don't really have anything to do with any mystery schools now. We kind of joke that the Thoth Witchcraft Patreon is kind of a mystery school because it is a place where people come basically to sit and talk with us so that we can kind of try and help them on their magical way. It is not really a true mystery school. We do joke that it's a mystery school, but if we were to create a true mystery school, it would take on a very, very, very different format, because at that point, what you'd be dealing with, Alex, is apprentices. So what you would be talking about,
pass an entrance exam rather than just pay the small amount that is the Patreon.
If our mystery school, if we created a genuine mystery school, and its purpose would be to push magical knowledge, the main priority of that mystery school would essentially be to interview people that we would train to push past our ability. So they can train other people to push past their ability, to push further and further and further. Anyone that doesn't make the cut would not get through to the next round. So think of that show, The Apprentice, if you've ever watched that, where they have to complete tasks and the like. Initiatory grade systems, offices within a mystery school. Essentially, when mystery schools start to decline, and you certainly see this a lot with most mystery schools, if not all of them, the people that are in the inner sanctum, if they are not able to train others to the same knowledge level and ability as themselves or further, the mystery school is on a decline. Much like business. If you're not able to generate as much money as you did last year, the business is becoming less profitable. And when it comes to mystery schools, the big danger, of course, much like you do with a lot of the Egyptian ones, was that there was a great knowledge at one point, and then it all goes a bit tits up to the point where it eventually come to the Ptolemaic period is kind of a parody of itself almost. So, I think it's just getting lost further and further and further.
By which point they'd buried all the good information for you to go and find. It's there if you want to go back to some of those old temples, but you'd have to go find it.
Well, when you're talking about mystery schools as well, remember, if it's human mystery school, you're talking about the main approach is to train people. So the next generation you train. Remember that these are not stupid people. If it's a serious mystery school, these are not stupid people. And that they will create time capsules. They will put their knowledge in other ways. If they know and don't want to take the risk that the next generation aren't going to be as smart as the current generation, they will start to seal that knowledge away so that when people can come along that are capable of doing that, then they can kind of reawaken that. There is kind of a point within any magical tradition or society where it exists on this physical level, and then it exists outside of the physical level. Okay, and when you get to that level where you're creating secret societies and the like that exist outside of that level, it's considerably different than the others, because you do not have to initiate someone that is a fucking idiot just to carry on. Much of magical traditions of the past were the great mystery schools. Once they got to the stage where they were able to run independently, I suppose, not have to worry about money, and really not having to worry about servicing the local community in the form of being priests and priestesses and that. When you're talking about the secret colleges or secret universities, you are talking about, well, you get your entrance exam, you're either in or you're out, and it's a case of certainly going over multiple lifetimes. Do you have the ability to go back or not? Much like fitness tests in the army, you need to maintain a certain level, and if you drop below that level, you no longer have access to that. What else have we got? I mean, they could be evolving and growing, just not publicly yet. So that I think we kind of covered that a little bit just then, actually. Indigenous peoples had a shamanic / priest class who held the power and knowledge. Would that be a mystery school? That would be the seeds of a mystery school, the start of a mystery school, yes. Because really what you're talking about is a school, and schools are designed to teach, essentially. Now, just remember that in modern times, colleges and universities are first and foremost a business. Secondly, they teach. What you're really talking about is some mystery schools take the approach of, we want to raise money and power, and then we'll teach second, but all we're really interested in is keeping our priests and that at that level of power and knowledge and the like business school. But then you've also got ones that really are just interested in the pushing the forefront of magical knowledge and scientific knowledge, or whatever you'd consider to be. And the other parts, the business side of things, the growing part, the ruling part, is not really of interest to them. So you don't think the library / university in Alexandria was doing a good of preserving and expanding the knowledge of Egypt and Greece? So if you're talking specifically about the Library of Alexandria, interesting. Again, you have to think about what was the purpose. If there is a mystery school within the Alexandrian Library, what was their purpose? Did they succeed with that purpose? So you really need to understand the purpose.
Here's one for you. Some would argue that in order to preserve something, in the astral world, you often have to destroy it in this world. And actually, what works better than destroying a whole library of what was supposed to be every known tome in the Western world, a copy of every, they would literally, as a ship came in, all its books were confiscated, copied, and returned to them. Now, to me, that seems like the biggest sacrifice of knowledge ever given. I don't know. I don't really think the Library of Pharos being destroyed was necessarily an accident.
If you're thinking of a mundane perspective that a lot of computer users can probably think of, remember when Windows every now and then asks you to create a restore point? So if there's current levels of understanding, we may think, let's take this. If you're a technical person, you might understand what an ISO image is of a hard drive, but let's take this, bundle it up, and stick it to one side. Now, obviously, you need to remember that that is a magical approach you could take. However, it wouldn't be the magical approach I would personally take, because there are better ways of going about such things. But remember, just because someone runs a mystery school doesn't mean that they're particularly knowledgeable about the mysteries.
Yeah. But it is
mystery school.
Pharos was destroyed at a very convenient time, just before some very big changes in the Mediterranean were about to happen. So, if I was a betting guy, and I'm not, I would have probably said that sounded strategic to me. And potentially from a magical point of view, rather than the actual obvious Roman answer to that.
But of the most dangerous things a modern magical practitioner can do is to try and force entry into mystery schools of the past. We get a lot of people every now and then. There'll be a little group of them. They'll come, normally go through cycles, doesn't it, Chris? Every so often there'll be one person, then another person, then another person, all trying to gain access to a cache of knowledge that's been secured by a mystery school, or to gain knowledge of a mystery school that they may themselves in a past or future reincarnation life been initiated into. One of the most dangerous things people can do, because you don't know what you're dealing with generally, and you're talking about breaking into something that's protected, knowledge normally above yours. So, I say normally because, of course, you're already locked out of the mystery school. So if you were at that level, you would have access to it, Yeah. But I don't think that's something that's discussed all that much, to be honest. Maybe we should keep stum.
Well, possibly. Or they could go and find the tier 3 of the Patreon, I guess, and start to ask those sorts of questions.
The Patreon, I guess, isn't it?
But yeah, it's one of those. I think it's an interesting concept that people don't talk about, like you say, and actually, this constant assumption, this constant assumption that obviously that we are the pinnacle, at this current period in time of knowledge, and you kind of you ain't got a clue, love. If you could access half the things, many
different directions. That's the thing. And there are things that you could access back then that you can't access now. And then you're just talking about presumably ones in the physical world, this physical world. So, the concept of the mystery school, of people coming together to create some sort of organization, it could be mirrored in other ways. What about the mystery schools of the Fae? Is there such a thing? Do they have the concept there? Well, they do have I wouldn't say hierarchy, but there is a structure, therefore within that structure potentially.
But they
again,
also
we're going far too of
they also they also
Faustus.
share knowledge in a very different way to humans, unfortunately.
Do you mean okay, so storing knowledge for safekeeping in the astral realm or such? I would generally say, personally, that when adepts, because you would probably be talking about adepts if you're talking about people that make the big decisions in a great mystery schools, maybe not the shitty ones, but the great mystery schools, they will do things that stack the deck in their favor. Therefore, if they're about to do something, it doesn't just work to their advantage in one way, it will work to their advantage in multiple ways. So if you're talking about stacking knowledge on the astral realm, that could be one benefit of doing that, but there would also be potentially normally more benefits from doing that as well. So you kind of need to mull that one over and have a real think about it and see if you do the same.
Yeah. And to just kind of go with the metaphor that you've put there, actually digging for it is not necessarily going to be, you're not going to chance upon. This isn't again, what's his name? I've forgotten his name. Tutankhamun. Howard Carter.
Oh, Howard Carter.
This isn't a, dig in the sand enough times and you might find something. It is, you would need to have an acceptable level of understanding to even broach that. So these aren't the sorts of doors you could just jimmy open. The seals on these are designed in ways that unless you have what we would call a foundational understanding of magic, and mostly an intermediate one at the very least, in order to get through some of these locks. And the locks aren't necessarily going to be something you can just blow off with some dynamite. These are things where the whole initiation process could be synthesized into a lock mechanism.
Initiation process, calibration process. Yeah. Very similar, really.
Yeah.
Michelle asks a question. Is accessing that knowledge something to strive for, or can we progress as far without worrying about it? Really depends, I think, on what your goal is.
Yeah.
Don't think that every mystery school knows more than you currently.
Yeah. There were some mystery schools that died out for a reason. It wasn't necessarily good planning to hide it, like a lot of the Egyptian schools. Some of them died out for good reason. It either wasn't working or it was never going to work to begin with. So, don't assume that, again, the same way we say don't assume the ancients didn't know more than we do, don't assume they did know either. It really depends on what you're digging at and, like Lynn says, for what reason. You need to go and become an adept in one of these mystery schools on the astral in order for you to continue with a comfortable level of money and family and happiness. If that's all your goal is, then just go about learning enough to tick the boxes that you need to tick. Some people have an obsession with gaining all knowledge. In order to do that, these mystery schools one or two of the mystery schools might be worth trying to get in. And I say try.
Which ones they are?
I'm not going to say which ones they are. No. Some of those I locked myself. So we'll see. Not alone, and that's the other part of it. Is some of these practitioners groups were never designed to be one person working as a solitary practitioner, which is why this isn't necessarily the right process for every magician, because some of these required a cult, not because 13 is the magic number. In some of these new modern age covens, there was a reason. There was a collection of knowledge that was required, and actually holding the knowledge that was required of all of them in one person the human brain did not have enough space for. So the same way that you would have multiple drives on a computer in order to run certain programs, it works the same way with people. Sometimes you need more than one in order to actually be able to download that size of file. But again, we're going off on levels that we're going to go over far too many people's heads.
In the modern perspective that we are now in the time frame we're talking about, in this physical body, in this linear time frame, in the year 2021, in the 21st century, I would say most of the great mystery schools have the same policy. It's called, don't call us, we'll call you. So if you're wanting to gain access to some of those, Michelle, striving towards that, you're not going to do that by a knocking on the door or trying to convince them. What it is it kind of is a little bit like, what is it that those university people do? An honorary degree, Chris, is that right? You go off and do your own thing, and then all of a sudden someone says,
yeah, knocks on the door, you deserve this
degree with the name of our university on, we're associated with them. It is one of those things. Do great interesting things, and great interesting things and people will come after you. So I would say what you want to do is to push yourself, because remember, in this current world, the best way of moving forwards is to create your own magical system and perfect it further and push it more and more. It is not to bound together and create secret societies and the like. If you want to progress quickly, the best thing to do is for you to take that mantle on yourself, that you are pushing yourself further and further and further. Because otherwise, if you try and go after some of these modern mystery schools and cults and the like, then a lot of the time you are binding yourself to the stupidity of the group, and then also the weakest, you are as strong as your weakest link. So you may find that they may give you a bit of a boost, but at the same time it may be a hindrance. Some traditional witchcraft covens, like if you've watched the interview with Lady Poison obviously spoke a little bit about the secret group that she's with, a Welsh tradition of witchcraft. They all have their thing that they do as a group, which is normally coming together to push the forefront, new experiences, exploration, but they're all have to and are encouraged to have their own practices, because if they're just pushing together, that's different than you making a breakthrough as a crazy ass mad scientist, and as well, it does help that if you're a crazy mad ass scientist and you're in one lab and you blow up the lab and kill yourself, then it doesn't affect the rest of the group. So some experiments you do as a group, some experiments you do on your, with yourself, and you don't need to be a part of a magical tradition or a coven or anything like that. If you find other magical practitioners, they will work with you. The moot system's quite good for that sometimes, because you've got a case of people that you meet up with on a fairly regular basis that you have no real interest in working with, but every now and then you might meet a couple of cool people and say, let's go and do this ritual, I'm interested in doing this, do you want to help type thing. There's no let's form a coven, there's no we've got to do this all the time, there's no kind of other than coming together for one job type thing. What do you think of Pan's mystery cult in the Greco-Roman world? It was supposed to have a particularly sinister side to it. Well, it's Pan.
There's your answer.
It's Pan. Who's Pan's daddy? That was a question.
Oh, sorry.
Pan, who's your daddy?
It depends on which story you take. It depends on what story you take.
So he's not going to answer. He's not going to answer. He's not going to tell you the definitive.
Yes.
Interesting. Maybe that might be a mystery within Pan's Mystery School. Who knows? Couldn't possibly say.
So,
when the student
is
ready, the teacher appears. They do say that. They do say that. Alex says that Hermes is Pan's daddy.
It's one of the versions.
Generally the one that most people would say. Yeah, the idea of when the student is ready, the teacher appears. How much weight would you put in that, Chris?
It can work that way, particularly when working with spirit teachers. Those definitely do arrive exactly when you're ready and only when, not a minute before. But then, if you've got an eternity and you need to schedule people into time, in an orderly fashion, zipping back and forth through time, then it kind of makes sense that you would lock on to when that person was ready as opposed to a time. So, I would set my alarm for when is Chris going to be ready? When will this particular part of their maturity reach? At which point, that's where I want to go to, because that's when they need me. It's that tricky thing about traveling through time, and how you actually connect those lines up. People aren't going to go, oh, I'll wait till he's 21. It's never going to be like that. It's going to be when is this person going to be ready and have the comprehension to not be wasting my time, is what it comes down to. Whereas, we take all and sundry who are willing to find us. As long as you are willing to work, we'll keep working with you. We haven't had to drop anybody yet. I've had moments, but we haven't actually dropped a person yet. I haven't revoked membership just yet.
When the student is ready, the teacher appears. Now, there's one big danger with that you need to remember. How does the student identify the teacher? Because there are many sinister things and people that will pretend to be that teacher. So it is true that sometimes bad people and bad experiences can push us and teach us. But at the same time, there are assholes in there, down here and up there and around in general. And
don't be so rude about
some things don't have your best interests at heart. Some things want to stop your progression. So it's really, I think the trick to that is identifying not when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Is can the student identify the teacher? Because how many times have we had certain quite powerful spirits come and tell students that they're ready, and the student is too scared to take them up on that opportunity? That was a big thing at one point when we first started Thoth. That was a big thing. We just found so many people.
It's kind of how this happened, isn't it? Really, it's
the
just
teacher says the student's ready. The student says, "No, I'm not."
So, it's kind of how this developed, I guess, a little bit, wasn't it? Is actually, kind of going, oh, okay, maybe they need an intermediary.
Yes, Alex makes a good point. The best teachers are usually not the nicest, at least on the surface. I take that approach. I am a right asshole to people, and that's what makes me a good teacher, I think.
I don't think that's the case.
Going out of your way to cause a trouble. I mean, there's something to be said with that. If you're talking about the great teacher spirits and the like, they're normally mercurial. It's the mercurial spirits that are often associated with the ones that teach magic and witchcraft and the like, and they're often trickstery types. And you do have to do that, because remember, to push in magic and the like, critical thinking is important. And when you have something this big and powerful, or a person that you admire, you can end up over trusting them, and your over trusting them means that you're not making the decisions yourself all the time. So what we tend to do every now and then, if we get a student that's too much like that, is we'll end up doing something which we tell them to do something and it works out terribly. And it should be obvious from just what we say. It should be obvious to them, I need to rethink this. This might not be a good idea. But then because it's coming from us, they say, well, I'm putting my trust.
Yeah.
And we have to exploit that, obviously, to teach them a lesson from time to time.
Sometimes it's necessary.
So the last question we've got, because we're an hour now, and I know this show's only supposed to go on for an hour. People are afraid of Thoth. Why Thoth of all teachers?
That's because most people don't like to be told they're wrong. So actually, they only want a teacher to be a little bit ahead of where they are. Whereas me, I've always wanted the smartest one. So I was never intimidated by Thoth. I want to be challenged. Not everybody feels that way. People that are scared of that challenge are often because they're not prepared to go where they need to go. Or at least that's how I would put it.
I was going to say, I think reading into that question, it depends, because have they already met Thoth and have a working relationship with Thoth? So is it the personality that they're not liking, the methodology, the kind of method of teaching and that kind of approach that doesn't gel with them and they're afraid of? Or is it the reputation before they even start working with the thing? So it is an interesting one. I can't say that I meet many people that are afraid of Thoth. But then I co-run a company that's named after Thoth, where Thoth is a patron of the work we do. So the chances are, if they're afraid, they probably ain't going to be coming to me, I suppose. But yeah, interesting though. I think, is that it then, Chris? Is there anything else you want to say?
I think so. I don't think we touched on any of the things we planned to. I think that was far more of a history lesson than we meant to be.
Well, we had a lot of questions, didn't we?
That's where the questions went, so that's fine. Yeah. I think just originally we kind of probably meant to kind of talk more about the
revealing the secrets of great mystery schools.
No, I meant more the Sith approach, the kind of the cunning man's way, the kind of slightly more modern way of, you know, only taking one student on a time or a very limited number of students, and having that kind of idea of passing on the knowledge you've got and then encouraging them to get better than you, in the hopes that the tradition continues, which doesn't really follow. And I'm using tradition really loosely there, because it's not about creating a tradition. It's more about passing on useful knowledge. You know, so it would be, you know, mash this, don't grind it. Use this as a paste, because actually it doesn't really work very well as a tincture. Like, you know, those kind of, the way you've kind of gone, actually, this person has got to a certain level of skill and therefore has found better ways of doing certain things, but can explain to you why they do it their way. And then you make your choice. Whereas you don't, you know, the whole point of a mystery school is the opposite end of that. It's about pushing a subject further, not an individual. You know, it's about pushing a civilization forward, not an individual. Whereas that kind of Sith Lord, I can't not look at it that way. Whenever you talk about apprentice, I just go straight to, you know, there can only be one.
Always
so
two,
yeah,
there are a master and an apprentice.
Yeah. So, you know, whereas that is kind of the way that things have been done for a long time now, but then it's easier to hide a pair than it is to hide a school. So maybe part of that is the reason we've adapted that way. So yeah, I think it was just, we would have probably gone off on a lot more of those kind of tangents if we'd, you know, not had all these lovely questions.
Well, we can revisit this subject. Maybe we'll revisit the subject on Witchcraft Live, and then maybe go into more detail of specifics at some point in the future. Or maybe we can do a podcast episode on it.
Yeah,
that might be quite cool.
That would be good.
I think there is one on the No Holds Barred Witchcraft podcast list. I'm sure there was a mystery school one that we added to it, but there's like 250 episode titles that we've got to do.
Yeah, we'll get to them eventually.
So the last thing before we leave, I heard that many Chinese medicine practitioners took that approach, but they never found any worthy pupils to pass on the knowledge, so now it's lost forever. I have personally asked a number of people that are of a decent magical standard, that really do the work, and I've given them a question, and I've said, would you allow all of your knowledge to die, or would you water it down and release it in the form of a book, or give to a person that's incapable of understanding it? Every single one of them said they would let it die.
Will it die?
Because letting it die often doesn't really mean that. Often it can be preserved in other forms. So, is one of those things really that we tend to take the approach of being quite rude, I think, when it comes to certain people's magical practices, because we see things that is very sad, that great things have been bastardized and watered down to the point of really it's kind of like looking at people that were very athletic and now they're dribbling in a corner out of their mind, not really understanding what's going on. That is the equivalent for a magical practitioner to look at a true mystery school, or to look at a true tradition, or religion even sometimes, or religious cult, normally religious cult, and then to see what neo-paganism has done to it now. And I think we better leave it at that. So goodbye, everyone. And next week we'll be back at the same time, 8 o'clock on Wednesday.
Yeah.